Japan laughed at Yamamoto's warning until the Pacific turned into fire January 13, 1942. The steel decks of the battleship Nagato creak beneath Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's feet as he paces the command bridge. Salt spray mingles with the morning mist over Hiroshima Bay, and through the fog, the silhouettes of Japan's combined fleet stretch to the horizon like sleeping giants. Yamamoto's weathered hands tremble slightly, not from the cold Pacific wind, but from a fear that gnaws at his soul. In his pocket, a half-finished letter to his wife's parents grows. Heavy with words his colleagues refuse to hear, the euphoria that has swept through Tokyo since Pearl Harbor 37 days ago feels hollow to the man who orchestrated the attack. While celebration bells still ring across the empire, Yamamoto sees only storm clouds gathering on America's distant shores. The very success of his plan has become his greatest nightmare. For he alone among Japan's military leaders truly understands what beast they have awakened, that this is the story of a prophet without honor in his own country, a brilliant admiral whose warnings fell on deaf ears until the Pacific Ocean itself caught fire with American vengeance. It is the story of how Japan's moment of triumph became the first chapter of their doom, and how one man's desperate attempts to prevent catastrophe were dismissed as the anxieties of a coward. But most importantly, it is the story of how a sleeping giant, once awakened, would prove that the thunder of American industry could drown out even the mightiest of imperial ambitions. In the autumn of 1940, as Hitler's Wehrmacht trampled across Europe and Japan's armies pushed deeper into China, Admiral Yamamoto found himself at the center of increasingly heated debates within the Japanese high command. Unlike his peers, who spoke of quick victories and American cowardice, Yamamoto carried with him the weight of intimate knowledge. He had walked the streets of Boston and Washington, had studied at Harvard, and had served as naval attaché in America from 1925 to 1927. He had seen the foundries of Pittsburgh belch smoke, the assembly lines of Detroit hum with mechanical precision, and the vast wheat fields of Kansas stretch beyond the horizon. While his colleagues dismissed America as a nation of shopkeepers and movie stars, Yamamoto knew better. He understood that beneath the veneer of jazz music and Hollywood glamour lay an industrial colossus, capable of unprecedented production. When pressed by the Army's war hawks about the feasibility of conflict with America, Yamamoto's response was chillingly prophetic. In the first 6 to 12 months of a war with the United States and Great Britain, I will run wild and win victory upon victory. But then, if the war continues after that, I have no expectation of success. The Army generals laughed. Vice Admiral Asami Nagano, chief of the Imperial Japanese Navy General Staff, dismissed these concerns as defeatist thinking. They spoke of Yamato Damashi, the Japanese spirit, as if courage alone could bridge the gap between Japan's limited resources and America's vast potential. They pointed to America's neutrality, to the isolationist sentiment that kept Roosevelt's hands tied, to the apparent weakness of a nation that had yet to fully emerge from economic depression. But Yamamoto saw deeper truths. In his private correspondence, he wrote warnings that bordered on desperation. To fight the United States is like fighting the whole world. His colleagues, intoxicated by visions of a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, dismissed such caution as the musings of a man who had grown too fond of Western ways. Japanese military culture of the early 1940s was built upon a foundation of spiritual superiority over material concerns. Officers who had never set foot outside Japan spoke confidently of American softness, of a population too comfortable and individualistic to sustain the sacrifices of total war. They convinced themselves that a single decisive blow would bring the Americans to the negotiating table, that Pearl Harbor would be not just a tactical victory, but a psychological one that would shatter American resolve. That how wrong they were. December 7, 1941. Dawned clear and calm over Oahu at 7:48 a.m. The first wave of Japanese aircraft descended upon Pearl Harbor like eagles upon sleeping prey. Within 2 hours, 18 American warships lay damaged or destroyed. 2,400 Americans were dead, and Japan had achieved the tactical surprise Yamamoto had orchestrated with meticulous precision. In Tokyo, the news was received with delirious joy. Emperor Hirohito himself praised the brilliant success. Newspapers proclaimed Japan's invincibility. Citizens danced in the streets, intoxicated by what seemed to be the dawn of a new era of Japanese dominance in the Pacific. But aboard the Nagato, as reports of the attack's success reached him, Admiral Yamamoto felt no celebration. His staff officers found him strangely subdued, almost melancholy. While they expected triumph, they witnessed something approaching grief. Later, some would claim he uttered the famous words about awakening a sleeping giant, though historians debate whether he ever spoke those exact phrases. What is certain is that his private letters from early 1942 reveal a man consumed by foreboding. Writing to his wife's parents on January 13, 1942, Yamamoto expressed his deep concerns about Japan's post-Pearl Harbor euphoria. He described the attack as just a minor victory over an unprepared enemy and warned that they would soon face a full-scale battle against an aroused America. His words carried the weight of prophecy. The Americans suing for peace was the only path to Japanese victory. He wrote, "Otherwise our industrial capacity would overwhelm the IJN." These letters, discovered decades later, reveal the tortured mind of a strategist who had succeeded too well. Yamamoto had given Japan the perfect opening move in the Pacific War, but he alone understood that it was also their last move before America's true power would manifest. And manifest it did, with a speed and scale that defied imagination. The transformation began immediately. On December 8, 1941, as President Roosevelt asked Congress for a declaration of war, American factories were already beginning their metamorphosis from peacetime production to the arsenal of democracy. What the Japanese military had dismissed as impossible became not just possible, but inevitable. The symbol of American industrial might came in the form of the Liberty ship, a simple, unglamorous cargo vessel that would become the embodiment of everything Yamamoto had warned his countrymen about. On January 14, 1942, just one day after Yamamoto penned his worried letter aboard the Nagato, the first Liberty ship, the SS Patrick Henry, slid down the ways at Bethlehem Fairfield shipyard in Baltimore. What followed was a display of industrial power that dwarfed anything the world had ever seen. American shipyards, many of which had never built a merchant vessel, began producing Liberty ships at a rate that seemed to violate the laws of physics. The first ships took 244 days to complete. Within a year, the average construction time had dropped to 42 days. The record was set by the SS Robert E. Peary. Built in just 4.5 days, a ship assembled faster than most Japanese vessels could be repaired. By war's end, American shipyards would launch 2,710 Liberty ships, averaging 3 ships every 2 days for 4 years. Each Liberty ship could carry 9,140 tons of cargo, enough supplies to keep a battalion supplied for months. They were ugly, utilitarian vessels, welded rather than riveted, built for function rather than form. But they represented something that no amount of Japanese spirit could overcome: the raw industrial capacity of a fully awakened America. The Liberty ships were just the beginning. As 1942 progressed, American factories underwent the most rapid industrial mobilization in human history. General Motors stopped making Cadillacs and started producing M4 Sherman tanks, ultimately building 49,000 of them. Ford's massive Willow Run plant, covering 3.5 million square feet, began rolling out B-24 Liberator bombers at the rate of one every hour by 1944. The numbers became almost incomprehensible. American industry produced 296,000 aircraft. During the war, more than Japan produced in its entire history up to that point. In 1944 alone, American factories delivered 96,318 aircraft, while Japan's entire 1944 production was barely 28,000. The United States built 102,000 tanks, 372,000 artillery pieces, 2.4 million trucks, and 87,620 naval vessels of all types. But perhaps the most devastating statistic was this: by 1944, the United States was producing more military equipment than all the Axis powers combined. American industrial output doubled between 1940 and 1943, while Japan's remained essentially static. The sleeping giant that Yamamoto had feared was not just awake, it was roaring. The psychological impact on Japanese forces was profound. Soldiers who had been told that one Japanese was worth 10 Americans found themselves facing enemies equipped with seemingly unlimited supplies of the latest weapons. Japanese pilots, flying increasingly obsolete aircraft patched together from salvaged parts, encountered American flyers in brand new fighters, rolling off assembly lines in numbers that seemed impossible. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, Japan's leading surviving ace, would later write about the shock of encountering waves of American aircraft over the Solomon Islands. Where did they all come from? We shot down 10 and 20 more appeared. We shot down those 20 and 50 more came. It was like fighting the ocean itself. The Liberty ships became objects of particular fascination and horror for Japanese naval officers. These ungainly vessels, dismissed by Japanese propaganda as cheap American junk, proved almost indestructible in practice. Though U-boats and Japanese submarines sank 200 Liberty ships during the war, American shipyards were launching new ones faster than they could be destroyed. For every Liberty ship lost, 3 more slid down the ways. Japanese Admiral Kiiki Nagamo, who had commanded the Pearl Harbor attack force, found himself increasingly frustrated by reports of American shipping. "How many ships do they have?" he reportedly asked his staff in exasperation during the Guadalcanal campaign. The answer, had he known it, would have been deeply demoralizing. By late 1942, American shipyards were launching more tonnage in a single month than Japan had built in the entire decade before the war. The symbolic power of the Liberty ship extended beyond mere numbers. Each ship represented something that Japanese military culture struggled to comprehend: the marriage of industrial efficiency with democratic resolve. These were not warships built for glory, but cargo vessels built for the unglamorous work of sustaining a global war effort. They embodied the American approach to warfare: methodical, industrial, and utterly relentless. By the summer of 1942, even as Japanese forces reached their maximum expansion across the Pacific, Yamamoto's prophecies were beginning to manifest. The Battle of Midway in June 1942 marked the exact moment when his prediction came true. 6 months after Pearl Harbor, Japan's run of easy victories ended in catastrophic defeat. 4 irreplaceable aircraft carriers lay on the bottom of the Pacific, along with many of Japan's most experienced pilots, but Midway was just the beginning. As 1942 turned to 1943, the full weight of American production began to make itself felt. New Essex-class aircraft carriers, built in record time, began arriving in the Pacific. Each carried more aircraft than many entire Japanese air forces. The USS Essex itself, completed in just 20 months, could launch more planes in a single strike than Japan could muster for most operations. Japanese intelligence officers, studying captured American equipment, found themselves confronting a reality that challenged their most basic assumptions about warfare. American soldiers carried semi-automatic Garand rifles while Japanese Troops still used bolt-action weapons from World War I. American tanks were not just more numerous, but more reliable, better armored, and equipped with superior optics. Even mundane items like boots, rations, and medical supplies revealed a level of industrial sophistication that Japan could not match. The psychological transformation was perhaps most visible in the changed tone of Yamamoto's communications. The confident admiral who had planned Pearl Harbor grew increasingly despondent as reports reached him of American production figures. In a letter dated March 1942, he wrote, "The enemy's industrial capacity is beyond anything we imagined. They are building not just ships and planes, but entire fleets and air forces faster than we can destroy them." His colleagues, still drunk on early victories in the Philippines and Dutch East Indies, dismissed such concerns as pessimism. But Yamamoto understood that Japan was fighting not just the American military, but the entire American economy, and it was a fight they could not win. The Liberty ships, meanwhile, continued their relentless procession across the Pacific. Convoy after convoy arrived in Australia, their holds stuffed with everything from Sherman tanks to canned peaches. The abundance was almost obscene to Japanese observers. American bases overflowed with supplies, while Japanese garrisons began to starve. Where Japanese soldiers counted bullets, Americans seemed to fire them by the thousands without concern. By late 1942, the contrast had become stark. Japanese factories, bombing by increasingly bold American air raids, struggled to maintain even minimal production levels. Critical materials like aluminum, rubber, and high-grade steel became increasingly scarce. Japanese aircraft manufacturers found themselves cannibalizing older planes to build new ones. Meanwhile, American production continued to accelerate. The Willow Run plant was now producing a B-24 bomber every hour. Kaiser shipyards had reduced Liberty ship construction time to an average of 24 days. Detroit's tank plants were running 3 shifts, their assembly lines flowing like mechanical rivers of steel. The abundance manifested itself in ways both profound and trivial. American troops in the Pacific received daily deliveries of fresh bread, Coca-Cola, and ice cream. Japanese soldiers subsisted on rice and whatever they could forage. American pilots flew aircraft so new that they still smelled of factory paint. Japanese pilots flew planes patched with fabric and held together with wire, but perhaps the most telling symbol came in the form of American logistics. While Japan struggled to supply its far-flung garrisons with basic necessities, American forces operated with a level of material support that seemed almost wasteful. Entire floating dry docks followed American fleets, allowing damaged ships to be repaired without returning to home ports. Mobile hospitals provided surgical facilities that were better equipped than most Japanese base hospitals. The Liberty ships were central to this logistical miracle. These humble cargo vessels, derided by Japanese propaganda as symbols of American quantity over quality, proved to be the arteries through which American industrial might flowed across the Pacific. Each Liberty ship could carry 10,000 tons of cargo, enough ammunition to supply a division for months, or enough food to feed a small city. As 1943 dawned, Admiral Yamamoto found himself in an increasingly impossible position. The combined fleet under his command was slowly but inexorably being worn down by attrition, while American forces seemed to grow stronger with each passing month. The industrial capacity he had warned about was now fully manifest, and its products were strangling Japan's Pacific Empire. His final letters reveal a man haunted by the accuracy of his own predictions. "We are fighting not just America," he wrote in February 1943, "but the entire industrial might of the Western Hemisphere. It is like a man with a sword facing a machine gun." On April 18, 1943, that machine gun found its mark. American P-38 Lightning fighters, guided by intercepted radio communications, shot down Yamamoto's transport aircraft over Bougainville. The architect of Pearl Harbor, The one Japanese leader who had truly understood America's potential, died in the jungle of a remote Pacific island. His death marked the end of an era. With Yamamoto gone, Japan's naval strategy devolved into increasingly desperate defensive measures. The tide had turned irrevocably, and the sleeping giant was now fully awake. The Liberty ships continued their relentless procession across the Pacific, each one a testament to the industrial power that Yamamoto had feared. By war's end, these unglamorous cargo vessels had carried over 60 million tons of supplies across the world's oceans. They had fed Allied armies, supplied Soviet factories, and sustained the vast logistical network that ultimately strangled the Axis powers. In the final analysis, the Pacific War was decided not by courage or strategy, but by production capacity. Japan had awakened a sleeping giant, and that giant had responded not with rage, but with the methodical, inexorable power of American industry. The Liberty ships, rolling off the ways in their thousands, had become the instruments of destiny. The laughter that had greeted Yamamoto's warnings in 1940 had long since died away, replaced by the thunder of American bombers and the rumble of Liberty ship engines. The Pacific had indeed turned to fire, but it was American fire, fed by American steel, carried by American ships, and sustained by an industrial capacity that had transformed the world. In the end, Admiral Yamamoto's greatest tragedy was not that he was wrong, but that he was right. He had seen the future with perfect clarity, had warned his countrymen of the consequences of their actions, and had been dismissed as a prophet crying in the wilderness. The sleeping giant he had feared to awaken had indeed stirred, and when it rose, it brought with it the full weight of American democracy, American industry, and American resolve. The Liberty ships that still sailed the world's oceans decades after the war's end served as floating monuments to that awakening humble, reminders that sometimes the most profound historical forces are not carried by great battleships or mighty aircraft carriers, but by simple cargo vessels built by ordinary people who understood that freedom, once threatened, must be defended with everything a nation can produce. And in the vast shipyards of America, where the sound of riveting guns had once thundered day and night, echoes of that great awakening could still be heard by those who listened carefully, a reminder that some giants, once awakened, never truly sleep again.